The next day, everyone said, "How did it go? What was that about?" And he goes, "Oh, yeah, the guy said you've got a wish free." And it turns out this was the biggest mafia boss in Sicily. And a wish free means that he would kill anyone he wanted him to kill.
Oh, my God.
Incredible.
Yeah.
If only he'd known.
Hello, welcome back to The Fast and the Curious with me, Betty Glover, and our team principal, Greg James. You will notice that our F1 knowledgeable hot pot, Christian Hugill, isn't here today, but we've more than replaced him, haven't we, with an even bigger Formula One knowledge hot pot.
These are McLaren level upgrades.
Yeah.
I think from the start of the season to mid-season. This is a huge, and I would say that to Christian's face as well.
Yes, just more experience around the sport and the industry. If you've ever read a major F1 story, the chances are that this guy right here has probably written it or broken it or found that story. The BBC's Formula One correspondent, Andrew Benson.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to The Fast and the Curious, Andrew. It's a real treat for us. We talk about you a lot.
All the time, Andrew.
And Christian talks about you a lot, very favourably as well.
Does he indeed?
And it's always, well, Andrew Benson said it. It must be. It's going to happen. It's happening. Andrew Benson said it. Andrew Benson. Betty. Andrew Benson has said that. I've read Andrew Benson, and it's going to happen. And it does normally happen. You know your stuff, Andrew.
Well, you can't get things wrong on the BBC.
Yeah,
That's the thing, really.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Trust me, I probably have.
So we've got so much to talk to you about. We'll talk about this season. We'll talk about 25 and 26 as well, which is very interesting because of the rules are changing. We've got your fantastic book, Remarkable Motor Races, to talk about, which is some of your favourite circuits around the world. But I want to take it all the way back to your first moment. I really love talking to people in all sport, really, about the first moment that you gravitated towards it. Was there a driver, a team, a race? What was it?
So, yes, there was. It was the 1979 Dutch Grand Prix, which dates me a bit, obviously. I'd actually just come back from holiday, and I turned on the telly, and this mad thing was happening. Formula One Ferrari was being driven around a track on three wheels. And I thought, what on earth is this? And for people who know about the sport, that was Gilles Villeneuve in that Grand Prix. And that captured my imagination. And so not immediately, perhaps, but over the next 2 or 3 years, things started to sort of percolate. And so I became, aged 10, 11, 12, a big Gilles Villeneuve fan until he was killed. And that really got me into Formula One, not the death, but just the whole experience of that. And it's kind of held me in its thrall, more or less, pretty much ever since.
Yeah. Were there other sports that tried to vie for your love, or was it always Formula One?
Well, I haven't always worked in Formula One, and I like all top-level sport. You know, if it's really good quality, like Six Nations Internationals or the Football World Cup or, you know, Grand Slam tennis or whatever, I like it.
Yeah.
But there's something about Formula One that just has that, for me, that has that little bit extra.
Yeah.
I think I've tried to capture some of that in the book. You know, it's about racetracks, but it's not really about racetracks at all. It's about the things that have happened on those racetracks that have made them and the people who did them famous, I guess. And I think it's that combination of things that attracts me to it.
Sorry, Betty. It's a great answer to the question. What sports do you like? Because I've never really heard it said about, and that's how I feel.
That's how I feel.
I feel like I'm attracted to all top level competition.
Just good sport.
Any sport. I really will watch any sport that is
I'm the
good.
exact same. And it's why you know, when the Olympics is on, people really get into those really, you know, those sports that you never usually watch, but people end up doing it in their kitchen.
You also mentioned about the circuits, and obviously it's not necessarily the circuit design that you love, although that's part of it. But I'm really interested in all sporting venues and how ordinary they are without the cars or the players or the people. And there's something extraordinary. When we went to Silverstone for the first time to do the first ever episode of this podcast, actually, at one of the shakedowns, and I love how run down bits of it are.
Yeah. Oh, it's
It's
great.
just a road.
It's like a
with
ghost town,
bad,
isn't it?
But like bins lying around and fences that are hanging off and everything. There's something extraordinary about a very ordinary venue becoming extraordinary, isn't there?
I think actually you're right, but I think also some motor racing venues have a sort of perpetual essence, if you like. Like if you go to Monza, for example, there's something about the feel of Monza. Okay, on the Italian Grand Prix weekend, it's something else again, but it's almost like you can feel the ghosts there. It sounds ridiculous.
No,
you
I
know,
don't think
but,
it does. I think that's,
and one or two others are like that. Obviously, others are just towns that a racetrack is built in every year. But there's one or two, and I think one of the interesting things about race circuits is that, you know, most sporting venues and most sports, okay, they're all different in their own way. You know, Wimbledon's different from Roland Garros, and you know, Wembley's different from the Bernabeu. But essentially, the sports surface that they play on is the same. What's interesting about motor racing is that the actual the event that the venue itself shapes the event, and it's the only sport where that really happens.
What's your favourite?
My favourite track?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I've got a few Grand Prix that I like to go to more than others, which isn't always to do with the greatness of the track. It's more to do with the sort of the wholeness of the event. But I mean, in terms of best tracks, you can't really look beyond Suzuka or Monaco, I suppose.
You said in the book that the Nürburgring was the greatest racing circuit.
I think most people would agree with that, wouldn't they? The Nordschleife. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
I went and saw a 24-hour race there.
Oh, yeah.
It's one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life. On every corner, there's a campsite.
Yeah.
But the campsite, people bring their entire front rooms and they build structures and put sofas on platforms and sound systems and lighting rigs. I've never seen anything like it.
Well, the other thing about the Nordschleife is you can go and drive around it. Anybody can go and drive around it.
And I watch a lot of those videos. That is my TikTok algorithm is a lot of people spinning off at the Nürburgring in a sort of in an old sort of, I don't know, in an old Fiat 500. People just going, or taking a white van round.
Yeah.
They're amazing, those videos.
Well, one story I didn't tell in the book was about a bloke who is in the book a fair bit, which is Gilles de Ferran, who died last December, the former Indy 500 winner and two-time IndyCar champion. He drove me around the Nordschleife 5 up in a Volvo estate in 1993.
That is so cool.
See, I'd love that. I love sort of boring family cars like that, but you can put them on the Nürburgring and they're suddenly exciting. How did it go round? Was it all right?
There was quite a bit of squealing.
Screaming.
I'm not sure whether
I
Angela,
imagine.
his now wife, was his wife then, but she was in the car, and there was me and Simon Aaron, a journalist who died actually a little while ago, and a photographer. There was a fair bit of shrieking. I don't think Gilles really knew the way round, but
I can imagine the creaking sound of it.
But it is as bizarre as that you basically you pay the thing and the barrier goes up like an NCP car park, and suddenly you are on one of the most famous racing circuits of all time.
So you can pay and then you just go through.
You pay and
it's
you
like
go.
€35 or
So
something.
I could just go and do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can just go on.
Epic.
No. But it's terrifying.
No, we should do it.
Have
We
you seen the
should
people
do
that hair
it.
around it? I mean, you've got to know what you're doing.
Well, do I have to go really fast?
You can't take your Nissan Juke round. Well, you could.
Well, the thing is, if you go around in your road car, you've got people who know it really, really well.
Yeah.
Who go around it all the time, blasting past you. So you've got to be quite aware of your mirrors. People on bikes, people in like Porsche 911s.
Yeah.
And you're tootling along going, which way does it go here as I come over this crest?
Yeah,
you
to
know?
be fair, it would be like that, Andrew.
Yeah.
It would probably
10 to 2,
actually
10 to
wouldn't
2,
be a very good idea.
mirror signal manoeuvre. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely one for the maybe pile. You know, we're doing outing.
Producer Jimmy is like, yeah, let's do it.
I'll drive you around it.
Oh, that would be wicked. Oh, I love that. I'm fascinated about how this sport has changed sort of in recent years, Andrew, because it really has sort of since, I guess, Drive to Survive. It's got a newer audience. It's got a largely female audience. It really does feel like it's starting to be way more accessible than it used to be. How much do you think it has changed?
Well, I remember the moment. It was like a light bulb moment when I realised what you just described had happened. So obviously everything shut down for COVID, and then I basically didn't go to a Grand Prix from the start of the 2020 season, when we all went out to Australia, and I spent longer on an aeroplane getting there and back than I did actually on the ground in Melbourne. That was a mad weekend. And then I didn't go again until Austin 2021. But even though it was always busy, that race, that year, it had like exploded. There were people, there's always people everywhere in Austin. But the difference was that the people everywhere in Austin were wearing Formula One team kit, you know? And so you'd be walking up and down South Congress, which is one of like the main trendy streets in Austin, on the Sunday night after the race, surrounded by people in Mercedes t-shirts, Ferrari t-shirts, which had not been the case before. And it was very obvious at that point that something really big had shifted in terms of the perception of Formula One. And it's been like that ever since, basically. Every Grand Prix you go to now, it's just rammed.
So for you, that's the dream, isn't it? That your favourite sport is suddenly growing in popularity.
Well, I wouldn't call it a dream for me, because my job is just to report on what's happening, right?
But you want people to read your stuff and be interested in what you've got to say, and you want this thing to thrive and grow. And
yeah, I want people to be interested in what I'm reporting on, for sure. And so it has been really fascinating to watch that develop over the last few years.
Yeah, it's brilliant, isn't it?
And actually, I think it's worth mentioning, I spoke to Gunther Steiner the other day. I believe he was on your podcast not so long ago.
Yeah.
He was saying, he was obviously talking about the growth and popularity of Formula One as well. And I think he made a really good point when he said that it's not just about Drive to Survive, it's also about social media and about Liberty Media basically loosening the reins effectively, because Bernie Ecclestone wouldn't let anybody. He didn't really understand the internet at all.
Mr. Burns
didn't get that. Doesn't get the concept of it really. He didn't think that it should be, and he had a very sort of closed mind view of how Formula One should be put out to the world. Liberty Media, when they took over in 2017, they changed all of that. Suddenly people, teams, drivers were able to, they were encouraged to put things on social media from inside the paddock. And the teams really embraced that. And I think that's also to do with why it's exploded so much.
Yeah.
Makes it more accessible.
On that, I wonder whether it became slightly more difficult to get the exclusive or to find the story because they were putting their own stories out. So that's an interesting balance for you, isn't it? Because they're almost saying their narrative, but you've got to just double check that and ask the extra question and go again.
Well, I think that there'll always be a place for journalism, because the job of journalism, fundamentally, is to tell people things that other people don't want people to know. So they're not going to volunteer to put out things they don't want people to know, right? And actually, there was a really good example of the whole way journalism works in Formula One and why it's so important in Singapore. With the whole Max Verstappen swearing situation. That was a really interesting 2 or 3 days to be a reporter, watching that unfold, being sort of kind of in the centre of everything that was going on. So I think, that's never going to be put out on official social media channels. So I think we're okay for now, the journalists.
Yeah, no, I think it creates... It just creates it's a different environment, isn't it? Because you so much of it is pumped out minute by minute, really throughout the race. Whereas you're there having to be at the centre of it, but actually take a step back and go, what is the real story here? What are they trying to get around? What is the thing?
That's
here?
how I see our role on BBC Sport is basically to take a step back, exactly as you put it, and say this is what matters.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of noise out there.
Yeah.
This is the important stuff.
Yeah. Fernando Alonso is doing the brat dance, but what's the actual story here?
Yeah.
this is it. Yeah.
Are you aware of the weight of an Andrew Benson confirmation? Because we wait around on this podcast. If we see a rumour on social media, we're like, no. We've got to wait until Andrew confirms it.
Well, that's very sweet of you to say so. I don't think about that at all. I just think about, modesty would forbid, obviously, but I just think about doing the job as well as I can. That's it.
But actually, what you brought up Singapore. I'd like to just ask you a little bit about that. What were your What were your thoughts now, looking back at that whole weekend with the swearing thing?
So I think lots of people couldn't really. We could sort of see it unfolding, and you could sort of predict the first bits of it. But it all seemed so surreal at the same time. You know, the timeline basically was FIA president does an interview in which he says he doesn't like the fact that the swearing goes out on the TV broadcasts. Well, the problem with that was swearing doesn't go out on TV broadcasts; it's bleeped out, right?
Yeah.
And so, what's he on about? And does he really want to take away the sort of the extra dimension that gives to the audience? So that's the first question, and then, of course, Verstappen went and swore in the Thursday press conference. And it was like, has he done that deliberately? I haven't yet asked him that question, and I'm not sure he would admit it. Although knowing Verstappen, he's very straightforward. He might actually admit it. Anyway, as soon as he'd done that, you thought, oh, what are they going to do next? And then the next day, the summons comes from the FIA stewards. He has to go and see them, and we were like, okay. So it's kicked off a bit here, and they'll end up punishing him probably. And then what's going to happen? So Saturday afternoon, so after qualifying press conference, was the first time that we were going to get to hear what Verstappen was going to do. And it became obvious quite quickly that he was doing something. You know, he wasn't basically answering the questions. Well, he was answering them, but in a very, very curt way. And actually, he's very good in press conferences normally, Verstappen. So, and the questions kept coming in. With Tom Clarkson, who's the compere there, I don't know what Tom's face was doing, but he was obviously looking a bit concerned because at one point Verstappen said, "Don't worry, this is not directed at you personally."
Okay.
Then one of the journalists called Luke Smith, who works for The Athletic, asked Verstappen a particular question about something to do with the setup of the car or something. And Verstappen said, "I'd rather you didn't ask me these questions in here." So I thought, okay, something's going on. So I was in the media centre at that point, which was just around the corner from the press conference room. I legged it into the press conference room, and I thought, I've got to ask, is he saying he will talk to us outside the room? Because if he is saying that, he won't talk in the FIA press conference room, but he will talk outside.
Okay.
That's quite a big statement. So I ran to ask that question, and he just went like that when I asked the question.
He just gave you a thumbs up.
Yeah.
What were you? What was going through your head at that point? Was your like heart racing? You were like, "Oh, this is exciting."
Well, my heart was racing because I had to run around the corner.
Got a big story here.
Yeah. And then at the end of the press conference, Verstappen walked out with Lewis Hamilton, and there's two doors. There's the door that the drivers walk out of, and there's a door that the media is supposed to go in and out of, which is at the other end of the room. And I followed Verstappen and Hamilton out of the driver door, waited for him to stop talking to Hamilton, and said, "Max, where are we going to do this?" And so then there was this sort of comedic situation where we sort of got to the end of the corridor, but we're still in the sort of on the first floor of the race control media center building, and I'm standing talking to Verstappen, asking, you know, kind of negotiating where are we going to have this conversation, and that people are all around me, and all the journalists are starting to gather, and then the FIA guy comes over and says, "You can't do it here because he's got to go to the TV pen." And Verstappen goes, "Well, they'll be busy right now." He says, No, you can't do it here. So he goes, "Well, let's just walk and talk then." So then there's this sort of series of photos of us all walking out, Max and I walking together, and everyone else around us walking down the stairs. And it just felt like one of those. Every now and again, you get these seminal moments in Formula One where the media and the action collide. That was definitely one of them. And of course, it happened again the next day. Not quite so chaotically, but it was another press conference for Verstappen outside of the press conference room on the Sunday after the race. So the whole weekend was really interesting on that front.
Yeah, and really interesting that they feel comfortable with you to do that, and they must, because obviously you get to know these people. You're on the tour essentially. You're with them, so they feel like they can be like that with you, candid.
Well, you get to know. If you're around long enough, you get to and you do a reasonable job, and the drivers come to understand that you are serious, you know, and then you build a relationship, you know. They know what you're about, and you know what they're about. And there's a sort of unspoken understanding there. Everyone understands that some journalists do have relationships with some drivers, and you just kind of mosey along quite happily like that most of the time, and then every now and again something big like this happens.
Yeah.
It must be quite nice to get to know somebody who's at that level of sport quite well. Like, for example, you know Lewis Hamilton really well, don't you? Because you had a bit of a column with him, didn't you, for a few seasons?
I did do a column with Hamilton for 3 years, when he first started at Mercedes. Actually, he's been really interesting the last few years. Hamilton's quite an apart. He's always been quite apart, and I think it's a form of protection for him because I think he has so much adulation, so much celebrity that I think he kind of tries to keep a sort of a barrier up, a kind of like a comfort zone almost. So
From
everybody,
from everybody,
just to protect himself. Yeah.
You can see why.
But deep down, he's a really fundamentally good person, and I wouldn't say I know him well, but yes, I do know him.
Very engaging as well when you're talking to him. Those must have been quite. It's quite privileged information, isn't it? Being one-on-one with someone like that, who is going to go down as one of the greatest ever sports people.
Well, you get, luckily, as a Formula One journalist, you get to every now and again, you get to be one-on-one with you are right, legendary sports people. That's what they are, and it's a privilege as well as a responsibility, because it's at the end of the day, it's just a job, and you are just doing a job. You're not,
of course.
You don't delude yourself. You're not these people's friend. You're there to do your job, and they're there to do their job, and but it's what they do is extraordinary, and so there's a gravitas about and a gravity about Formula One drivers and what they do, which I think is a real, as I say, it's a real privilege to be quite close to that.
On the Lewis Hamilton point, you were doing like a column with him, weren't you, for those 3 seasons? And it was almost like a bit like a diary entry from him for the BBC. Was there anything particularly, I don't know, astounding or shocking, or what was the most interesting thing you learned during that time?
He was just really great to work with. He was super professional. He would basically address any topic you wanted to address, and it was very efficient. There was no messing about. You would turn up, we'd do the column, we'd stop, and then you do the thing like you do with a column, you send it off to be checked, and very little was changed. Some drivers aren't like that when you do columns with them. Some of them are like really awkward. I'm not going to name any names, but he was just like absolutely a dream to work with throughout that entire 3-year period.
How do you feel about the Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes era coming to an end?
Well, everything in life comes to an end, doesn't it? Eventually. And I think what it's setting up is a really interesting narrative for next year. How's he going to get on at Ferrari? How's he going to compare with Charles Leclerc? Everyone's going to be watching that, and if he does manage, just imagine if he manages to win an 8th title with Ferrari, it'd be like, wow. So how big
meltdown,
would that be?
Internet meltdown.
Yeah. Massive.
Well, that's a great answer. That's a journalistic answer of the story.
Yeah.
It's a great story, and it's an amazing story, not just for him, but for the sport. Again, bursting out of its bubble. Everyone knows Lewis Hamilton. Everyone's heard of Ferrari. Those two things together,
Iconic.
They're irresistible, aren't they?
Yeah. He transcends the sport like no other current driver, and Ferrari transcend the sport like no other team. So to bring those two iconic things together, it's I mean, it hasn't happened yet, but when I'm really fascinated to see what it looks like when it does happen.
I wonder, I could just pick your brains about longevity of these drivers. You've seen them across. When was Fernando's first race? What was he? Early
2001.
2001.
Yeah.
So, but that longevity is fascinating for any career, but particularly top level sport. What have you noticed with those sorts of people? Are there traits in those personalities that are the same? Are there things about Lewis that are similar for Fernando? And do you spot those in other drivers? What keeps them going?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, I think what's most interesting about Fernando Alonso, particularly because obviously he's 2 or 3 years older than Hamilton. He's already 43, isn't he? And he's still got 2 more years at least to go.
Because it's not money that keeps them going, because they've got more than they ever need.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For him, it's just desire, joy. And he just loves being a racing driver. Yeah. And I think, for me, the most extraordinary thing about Fernando Alonso staying in Formula 1 for as long as he is doing is that he doesn't think it's extraordinary.
Really?
Yeah. He just thinks it's normal. I'm due to do an interview with him hopefully soon, and this is what I want to ask him is, why doesn't he think does he not, surely he must recognize that it's extraordinary. But
then I guess, when did he start karting? When he was 6, 5 or 6?
Even younger than that, I think.
So he hasn't known anything else.
Yeah.
Driving a car is the most normal thing in the world for him.
What's the difference between like Fernando Alonso and Daniel Ricciardo, for example?
Great, yeah.
Well, one of the differences is adaptability. So what happened with Ricciardo was that I think he, for some reason, hasn't been able to adapt to a particular kind of car, whereas Alonso seems to be able to drive anything. And that's just to do with the sort of roundedness of a racing driver's ability. So I think Ricciardo was very, very good in a particular kind of car, whereas Fernando's exceptional in every kind of car. But I think what's extraordinary about him is that the desire has stayed so powerful for so long, because that's what normally finishes drivers off. The desire dims. You know, you can't drive a Formula 1 car fast unless you're absolutely on the limit of braking, absolutely dancing the car on the edge into the corner, absolutely nailing the throttle at the earliest possible point. Corner after corner, lap after lap, session after session, race after race. And understandably, you know, as people get older, their brains sort of start to think about, first of all, that's not so important to them. You know, other things become more important to them. Staying alive becomes more important to them. But his brain hasn't hit that place yet somehow. Yeah. Maybe it's a lack of imagination, I don't know.
Yeah.
But,
it's just normal to him.
But it's extraordinary,
Yeah, that's such an interesting point about joy. I love that you said it's joy that he finds from racing. Obviously it's that, but within that there are moments of discomfort that they have to push through. Bad seasons, bad cars, bad teams, bad runs of form. And I wonder if that's one of the things that separates the very, very best from the ones who are pretty good to very good, is being able to go, if I push through this, I'll find that joy again. Because it does get hard. It gets hard, even for Fernando or Lewis.
Well, I saw an interview with Alonso recently where he's still talking about winning a 3rd World Championship. I mean, the last World Championship he won was in 2006. He hasn't won a race since 2013. And he's still got that belief that he can do it, you know.
Hang on, Fernando, he's not won a race since
2013.
2013?
Yeah.
And to still have that belief and still be turning up and believing that you can do it.
Tell him he's deluded, Andrew.
Do you think, Andrew, it's because we've got a Fernando Alonso dog toy?
Probably.
That's sort of...
Goodness me, that's extraordinary, isn't it?
Do you like it?
Yeah. Do you want to give it to him in the interview, the long-awaited interview?
Do you want me to take that? I'm not quite sure what he'd make of that, actually.
Yeah, before we start, Fernando, I got this for you. Yeah, I wonder what he'd say. Well, what's I'd love to chat to Fernando. What is he like one-to-one?
He is probably the most interesting character in the whole of Formula 1, just because there's so much depth to him and because he's so smart, and he's always got an angle, and he's so naughty, you know. He's so mischievous, and every Formula 1 journalist will recognise this, that, you know, we all, when he comes out with some of the sort of choice remarks that he comes out with, we're all sort of behind the scenes, we're all like, oh, good old Fernando, he's come out with another one, you know.
I want to ask you say obviously he hasn't won a race since 2013, but he's still here. He believes he can do it. Do you believe he can do it?
Well, I mean, it's hard to tell right now, right? Because his car's not competitive. But look at what he did last year. It looked like he was driving every bit as well as he ever had done. And although the Aston Martin's not a particularly good car this year, he's still absolutely wiping the floor with Lance Stroll. So there's no evidence that he's lost it as a driver. So if he gets a competitive car and look who's designing his car in 2026, Adrian Newey. Why wouldn't he be able to do it? That's what I would say.
When did you first get a whiff of the Newey move?
Whiff of the Newey.
Not a whiff of the Newey, a whiff of the Newey news.
So I'd heard a couple of rumours, but I hadn't properly nailed it down. And then a guy called Michael Schmidt wrote a story in Automotor and Sport saying that it was believed that he had told Red Bull that he wanted to leave. And I thought, right, this is what I've heard. I better nail this story down now. So then, so I nailed it down, and that's when we ran it that same day that Michael ran it.
How did you nail it down?
That would be telling, wouldn't it? Phone calls.
But that's you just picking up the phone and going, right, what do you know here? And that's when you go into full pest mode.
Yeah. Full report.
And that's when all the head of communications go, oh, for
oh, Benson's on it.
That's when they know they're toast, basically. You look at the phone and go, oh,
yeah,
Benson.
I better not say too much about that little situation. But then afterwards, so there was a period where they hadn't announced it, but we had run the story, and then we ran a second version of the story a couple of days later, saying that he was going to get out earlier from his contract, earlier than his contract had initially said. And then obviously it was confirmed just before Miami this year. And then of course it was like, what's he going to do? And it did look like for a long time like he was going to go to Ferrari, but that fell apart for reasons I'm still not completely clear about. And
so you think that was on the cards then?
Definitely was on the cards. Yeah.
And with that, do you think, in your view, if you want to answer, do you think that was a Lewis-led idea?
I don't know. I don't know why it didn't happen. Not completely, anyway. But there was definitely some conversations there. I think we reported at the time that Fred Vasseur and him had met in London, but it didn't happen. And so after that, obviously it became, and then Mercedes decided they didn't want him, and McLaren decided they basically didn't want him. They weren't prepared to pay as much money as other people were. And Newey obviously was romanced by Lawrence Stroll, shown the factory, shown the money, and I mean, I can see why he's done it. There's people at Aston Martin that he's worked with before, particularly Dan Fallows, the technical director.
The Dan Fallows.
Dan
Fallows.
He was working with Newey at Red Bull. And the factory is new, and they've got all the facilities that they need. There's a new wind tunnel just about to come on stream. So in theory, he should have all the resources that he needs. It's obviously a bit of an ask to expect him to go in the beginning of March in 2025 and have a car that's running right at the front 9 months later. But
2026 though.
Yeah.
That's when all the regulations are changing, right? So
yes, and that's the point. But it's so theoretically the regs come out, the aerodynamic regs come out in January the 1st or 2nd next year for 26. No one's allowed to work on it before then. Right. So theoretically, Newey's not allowed to work for Aston Martin until March next year.
Dream gig.
And so then he's got to catch up and get involved very quickly in building that car.
Again, great stories. And there's been great stories on and off the track with Red Bull this year. And you had to cover that, and you had to dig and make the calls around the Christian Horner allegations as well. That's been a really tumultuous time for them.
It has.
And for the sport, actually, because it really, that burst out the bubble in a negative way.
Yes. So that has been a really interesting thing to report on, obviously, when the team principal of the World Championship team gets accused of sexual harassment by a female employee. That's obviously a massive story. It's obviously important to say that Red Bull have had 2 investigations and he's been cleared by both. We'll have to see if there's going to be any further developments on that story. Obviously, Newey's departure was at least partly related to that. We don't know the same about Jonathan Wheatley, the sporting director, who's decided to go to Audi, and Will Courtney, the head of strategy, who's going to McLaren. We don't know that whether they're linked or not, but there's no question that if you lose, if you have that sort of allegation against the team principal and you lose the best designer there's ever been in Formula One, one of the blokes who was absolutely key in the entirety of the success story of that team, and the guy who's been head of strategy for basically 14 years and been there since before it was even Red Bull. He was at Jaguar.
Wow.
In fact, Steiner was saying he employed Will Courtney at Jaguar. When you lose 3 people of that sort of seniority, that's going to have an effect.
Well, it's destabilising, and I this is me just speculating, but that does get to the driver in their head in some way. I'm not saying that it definitely affects the performance, but that's in Max's head. That's there, isn't it?
Of course, what we've not even talked about is that the driver's dad, Jos Verstappen, he's not hidden how he feels about it.
He's been very vocal
He
about
said
it.
in Bahrain, the team's going to fall apart if Horner stays in place.
Yeah.
And they've now lost 3 senior people, and the Verstappens are still there. And I know that Max has felt very uncomfortable about the whole situation all year. He's been very clever about the way he's made his public statements this year, but let's not forget back in Austria when there was a bit of a kerfuffle, you may remember, about Horner intervening and Jos Verstappen driving a demo run in an old Red Bull. And Jos Verstappen went public with that. Max said in the press conference, he basically pretty much sided with his dad, as you might expect him to. So, that can't be a comfortable situation in any team, can it? Before we
go on to talk about some of the newer drivers that are exciting you and what you've seen from them and some thoughts about next year and 25 and 26, I just wanted to ask you about the difficulty of making sure you still enjoy your favourite sport while being exposed to the insanity of it at times, because you see how the sausage is made now. So it's in a way, some of it's been ruined for you. You see the darker side of it. You see the arguments. You understand it. Are you still a fan of this sport? I wouldn't describe myself as a fan. I'm a reporter. I haven't been a fan for a very, very... I don't think you can be a good reporter and a fan. I'm not saying I'm a good reporter, by the way, just that... Well,
I think you are, Andrew.
I'm saying you are.
Yeah.
A fan doesn't have objectivity and impartiality, and objectivity and impartiality are the very core of everything the BBC are about and everything I'm about as an employee. So I would see what the things that you've just described. That's all part of the rich tapestry of Formula One. It's what makes it so compelling as a sport, that it is a soap opera as well as a sporting spectacle. I think one of the things I've always found most fascinating about Formula One is that it strips people bare. You cannot hide who you are if you're in a senior position in Formula One, because the intensity is so high. You are revealed. Everything about you, your personality is revealed for everybody to see. And that is just the most fascinating thing to work on as a journalist. So you've accessed new areas of it in a way. You became more than a fan. I just wondered if you felt sad about the fact that you started loving this sport and idolizing these people, and then you've had to, in a way, shed that a little bit as it's become a serious part of your life. You can't turn the Grand Prix on and just sit back and go, "Oh, I love that car." No, you have to remove yourself from that aspect of it. But I don't see it as a negative. Actually, in many ways, it makes it more interesting to be able to step back and just observe and find out, because that's my job, is to find out, what's actually happening and why and how. And those two questions, why and how, are the most interesting things, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Who, what, where, when, why.
Yeah.
First thing you learn.
Is that journalist school?
That's journalist school.
That's journalist school.
It's journalist school. Andrew, let's talk about the future, because we've talked a lot about sort of the older drivers that are still there, still doing great things. We've talked a little bit about 2026 and stuff, but some of the new young drivers that are coming through are just so exciting. Like Kimi Antonelli, for example, everyone's been raving about him for, quite a long time this season, from the start of the season, really. But who's really exciting you? Who's caught your eye?
Well, So, I mean, I think it's important to remember that it's not very long since we've already had one massive influx of young talent. You know, if you think of the generation of Leclerc, Russell, Norris, wow.
Alex Albon,
you know, they're like, how good are they? You know? Antonelli is the sort of the next, the sort of leader, if you like, or perceived to be the leader of the next generation of young talent. Of course, Verstappen was part of that Leclerc, Russell, Norris thing, although he came in a bit earlier than them. I mean, we've got to wait and see, haven't we, how good Antonelli ends up being. But everybody says he's incredibly talented, and obviously he only did 1.5 laps in free practice.
Oh yes, remind everyone what happened there.
Monza.
Yeah.
But what laps were they were? I mean, he went fastest straight away, and then the second lap, he did a second sector time that was faster than anybody did for the rest of the session. So, okay, maybe he overcooked his tyres in doing it, and that's why he went off.
What a way to go, though.
But what way to go.
Show everyone what you can do, and then
See ya.
Actually, Mercedes have got themselves. It's worth pointing this out for next year, by the way, in terms of talking about narratives that we're going to be looking at in 2025. Obviously, Hamilton, Leclerc, and Ferrari is one, and whether Verstappen stays at Red Bull is another. But that's related to the Mercedes situation. So you've got Russell and Antonelli. How are they going to compare? And if Mercedes succeed in signing Verstappen,
then what happens?
Then what happens? Who do they keep out of Antonelli and Russell? Because, you know, Toto Wolff's already said that he expects Russell to be better than Antonelli next year because Antonelli's only a kid and he's brand new. But if he does sign Verstappen, and if Antonelli shows anything like his expected potential, how could Wolff get rid of him? And then what happens to Russell?
What do you do?
So that's really, I mean, I'm not saying Mercedes will sign Verstappen, of course, but they definitely want to.
Yeah. Could you make some calls and confirm that for us?
Yeah.
That'd be really handy.
What about Franco Colapinto? Because did you expect him to be that good?
No, I don't think anybody did.
No.
I think not even sure Williams did. But he has been really impressive. There's no question about that. He was having a perfectly respectable Formula 2 season until he got the Williams drive. And then he just came in and he was on it straight away. And so, of course, we don't know whether he might be around next year. It's been the timing's been a bit unfortunate for him. But
there's sort of one seat left, isn't there?
Yeah, the Audi one. And he's definitely in the frame there. I spoke to Mattia Binotto the other day. He said they haven't decided yet, but will it be Valtteri Bottas? Will it be Colapinto? Will it be Gabriel Bortoleto, who's another guy who's looking good in Formula 2 at the moment?
Yeah, I was reading about him as well. So what do you do?
I don't know.
What would you do?
You wait and see. Oh yeah,
It's not for me to say, is it? I mean, Bottas is a safe pair of hands, isn't he?
I don't know. He's a mad pair of hands. Isn't he? He's absolutely insane. I really want to get him on this podcast. I think he's a fantastic character.
Yeah.
There's so much going on there.
Yeah.
I mean, what is it with these drivers who, when they have a break, they go and race? What's with these guys? It's all they can't stop.
Go and rest.
Yeah. Well, it's part of his training, isn't it, Bottas, the cycling?
Yeah.
But he obviously takes the cycling very seriously. And the mullet and the moustache, well.
Yeah, fantastic characters though, aren't there? Before we wrap up, I want to just pick your brains about a few of these circuits and the stories associated. When you were writing this book, so Remarkable Motor Races, it's the circuits, but really, as you've talked about, the stories within them. What were the stories that surprised you? Because you know a lot about this sport, but you would have done a lot of digging and found some surprising things. What were the things that surprised you when you were researching the book?
So I think I've got some favourites of them. Actually, probably some of my favourite chapters are not the Formula One chapters.
Well, I've just turned to the Mille Miglia because that is a thing that I would love to do. The Mille Miglia. Have you done that before?
No, I haven't, but it's obviously an iconic event. I think the biggest surprise was doing the Targa Florio chapter and finding out the story about the Helmut Marko and the Mafia chief.
Okay, do tell.
Oh, go on.
So well, I don't want to ruin the book for anyone who wants to go and buy it, but
trust us, they'll buy it.
What page is that?
Helmut Marko So this was the principle behind some of these chapters, was to talk to the people who'd done done amazing things at these great venues. And Helmut Marko still holds the lap record at the Targa Florio. Now, obviously, the Targa Florio has not been held as a competitive event for a very long time, but so this was 1972. And he told me this story about being at the after-event party, and he'd had a few glasses of wine, and someone came over to him. He was driving for Alfa Romeo at the time, and the Alfa Romeo was run by a guy called Carlo Chitti, who's a very famous Italian engineer. Anyway, this guy comes over to Marko at the party and says, there's someone you need to come and meet. And Marko goes, no. You can imagine Helmut Marko. If anyone's seen him he's just a very direct, straightforward sort of guy. He doesn't take any nonsense. I'm not interested. And then Chitti came over and said, you don't have a choice. You have to go and see this guy. So Marko says he goes over to see this guy, and he's one guy sitting down surrounded by two other guys on either side of him. Guy doesn't speak English. One of the guys translates for Marko, and the guy says how impressed he was by Marko's performance. And he says, you've got to wish free. Marko didn't know what this meant, so he went back to his drinks, and the next day everyone said, how did it go? What was that about? And he goes, oh yeah, the guy said, you've got to wish free. And it turns out this was the biggest mafia boss in Sicily. And a wish free means that he would kill anyone he wanted him to kill.
Oh my God.
Incredible.
Yeah.
If only he'd known.
So that was quite a surprise.
Who would Helmut Marko like to kill now?
Yeah.
Who would he, can he cash it in now?
I wonder how long that lasts. Does it have an expiry date?
If anyone knows, any Mafia
Let
bosses
us know.
listening, do wish-free requests.
You talking about Helmut Marko has reminded me that we need to get you to sign our helmet.
Right, okay.
With a Marko pen. Yeah, great. Do you still think that there's an upset here?
It's possible, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm aware of the fact that this might be going out.
Yeah, disclaimer.
A little bit late,
but as of recording,
as of now,
mathematically possible.
It's definitely doable.
Yeah.
Obviously, Norris needs other people to get between him and Verstappen, and he needs to keep winning. If he doesn't keep winning, he's kind of a bit stuffed. And I think one of the interesting things about the last few races is that although the gap's come down, actually the average points Norris needs per race has been creeping up all the time.
Yeah.
So that just underlines how difficult it is for him, I think. But it's definitely doable with McLaren's performance. Obviously, McLaren probably look like they're going to win the Constructors' Championship, and that normally the Constructors' Championship is not that big a story, right? But I think this year it really is.
Because they haven't won it.
They haven't won it
so
since
long. Yeah.
'98. Now, again, that's a bit of an anomalous statistic because they really won it in 2007 when they got disqualified because of the Spygate stuff, where they were accused of, using confidential information from Ferrari. There's a podcast, by the way, people can go and listen to about that on BBC Sounds if they want to.
Is that hosted by you?
You're in it. I'm in it. Yeah, I was not. I
am going to listen to that. Actually.
Yeah, I am actually as well. It's good.
I'm not the only one in it, by the way. But, so yeah, I think that's it's a part of the McLaren recovery, isn't it? Because McLaren have not just recovered in the last year and a half. Think back to where they were when Alonso, who we were talking about earlier, was there. They were terrible. By the time he left, they were basically the slowest team on the grid.
Yeah, it's mad.
And
to think,
come
isn't
back
it?
from that to this, it's and they're a customer team. They're not a factory team, which to me that's just in itself that's a big story.
Yeah.
I think that their lead isn't a lot, is it? Red Bull could.
Well, even Ferrari, if depending on how they perform in the next few races.
Andrew Benson, thank you so much for coming on the pod. When's your book out?
It's already out.
It's already out.
Yeah.
It's already out, and can I just
All
say,
good booksellers.
it's absolutely beautiful. I mean, it really is. If you're a new Formula One fan or an old Formula One fan, there'll be things in here. The photography is sensational, and obviously it's full of Andrew's very smart observations and actual history about this fascinating world of motorsport. So it's got stuff about Le Mans, the Mille Miglia, it's got Laguna Seca, it's got all these incredible circuits
You could
and the
learn a
stories
lot.
that were told on them. So you should get it. It's called Remarkable Motor Races.
How Taylor Swift saved the US Grand Prix. Is
Yeah,
another story.
Austin, right?
Yeah.
Tell us that quickly, because that's a really interesting
That
story.
is really interesting.
That was a real sea change in
Yeah.
the entertainment landscape of the sport, wasn't it?
Producer Jimmy loves that story.
Oh,
That was the
yeah?
one thing that he picked up from that book. Yeah.
Oh, well, thanks, Jimmy. Yeah, that was another really interesting thing, actually. So the US Grand Prix, when it started in Austin, everyone loved it, but it was looking a bit shaky financially for a while.
Shake it off.
And then Bobby Epstein kind of serendipitously came across the idea of Taylor Swift having a concert at the track. It turned out her manager lived in Austin.
Right.
And he had lunch with Bobby Epstein, who's the promoter, the boss of the Circuit of the Americas, and said, "Oh, well, she's been looking after her mum. She's been ill for a while, but she's up for doing a concert. You know, maybe she could do a concert at COTA." So they put it on, and that set the template for the race. Basically, they put the concert on sort of on Saturday evening. They moved qualifying later, so that the fans would bring their whole families, and they could watch the qualifying and then stay for the Taylor Swift concert. And also it meant the traffic was a bit more manageable. And that set the template not just for the US Grand Prix. It was a huge financial success, unsurprisingly, having Taylor Swift. She wasn't as big then in 2016 as she is now.
No, not at all.
But still pretty big. And for them, it was like a real, the pennies drop moment. That's how they've run the US Grand Prix ever since. Concerts on the Friday and Saturday and Sunday, or Saturday and Sunday, I can't remember exactly. Every year the Rolling Stones have been there, Elton John's been there.
Wow.
And it's really made it work economically as a race. And it's also the template that Liberty has basically put on every other race around the world. That when they came in, their idea was to make every Grand Prix an event in its own right, a Super Bowl, as Chase Carey, the former boss, described it. And concerts are part of that. And it maybe wasn't the very first time, but it was the first time it was seen to really work. And so it's not to be underestimated, the importance of that event. Yeah.
And how it really attracted families. I mean, even a few weeks ago, Kamala Harris, current vice president, was talking about how she sits down with her family to watch.
She said she loves
Was
it.
she?
Yeah, there was this
Really?
fantastic interview she did where she was doing it with Howard Stern in America, and her face lit up, and she
Really?
sounded so passionate about it. And she said, "Oh my God, we sit and watch every week, and our family, we love Lewis Hamilton." So when you speak to Lewis next, a Kamala Harris question I think he'd be absolutely chuffed.
I might add that to my list for Austin. Yeah.
You're welcome.
It was great because Howard didn't really know anything about F1, didn't like it. And she was like, how can you not like it? It is great.
Yeah, it was
amazing.
really, really lovely moment, actually. So it's got a foothold in America, hasn't it?
really has
in a big
now.
way.
Yeah.
It
really has.
Andrew, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Have an amazing rest of the season. We'll be locked into your columns on the BBC Sport website, and locked into your all your pieces and everything that come out of the next few Grand Prix. And who knows where this season will end?
Indeed.
That's what makes it fun, right?
All glued to our TV sets.
Give us a little cheeky text, Andrew, if you hear anything interesting.
Yeah, give us something.
little heads up.
Give us an exclusive, like a small one.
Andrew, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.